Welcome to the Rosbergs, your marriage coaches. Join Dr. Gary and Barbie Rosberg, America's family coaches, who bring 4 decades of empowering marriages across the U.S. and internationally for this podcast to equip you and your partner with encouragement and tools for a great marriage. Here now are your hosts, Dr. Gary and Barbie Rosberg.
You know, it was years ago, I did counseling privately and did about 25,000 hours of counseling. And one morning, I got a call from a guy that I was an acquaintance with. I didn't know him well. We'll call him Phil, married to Susan, and that's not their names. And he said, Gary, we need to see you today. And it was about 8 in the morning. And I said, Phil, I don't have anything today. I got a 6-week waiting list. And he said, well, Gary, we can't wait 6 weeks. And he said, we need to see you today. In fact, we're just headed over. We'll be in your waiting room. And just squeeze us in when you can squeeze us in. And I thought, okay, this guy is desperate. And sure enough, a couple hours later, they were out there. And I think it was during lunch or something, and cleared some time. And I brought him in. The wife was gray, just no color. The guy had been crying. He clearly had his back up against the wall. And I said, what's cooking, you guys? And he said, this morning, I was changing the diaper on one of my kids. And I was going to take him to the park or something in the afternoon. And he said, as I was changing the diaper, I needed one of those wet ones. And so I went into a beach bag that was in the closet in one of the kids' rooms. And I started rummaging around. And I didn't find a wet one, but I found a piece of paper folded up. And I opened it up. And he said, when I started to read it, my back fell against the wall of the closet and I slid down. And what a few moments ago was a pitted out little girl or little boy's closet became a sanctuary. And I thought, where are you going with this? And he said, I started to read a love letter to my wife. He said, the problem, Gary, is that it wasn't from me. And it was those last few words, it wasn't from me. And it's like my heart sank. And I just thought, God, not this couple. I mean, this is a precious couple. They got these kids and they're in a good church and they're good people. And please, not this couple. Satan, get away from this couple. And I said, well, then what happened? He said, I just kept reading it. And as I was reading it over and over and over again, all these things began to make sense. It was like I was putting together this puzzle that had eluded me. But now it was fitting. And he said, but I knew as soon as I got up from that closet and approached my wife, my life would never be the same again. And I said, well, what'd you do? He said, well, I couldn't stay in there forever. I got up, started walking down the hallway. And as I was walking down the hallway, there were pictures of whitewater rafting from a vacation in Colorado and pictures of Halloween and trick-or-treating and pictures of graduations and all of these memories flooding over me. And I knew as soon as I talked to my wife, that was all going to be cast to the wind. He said, I walked in the bedroom. She had her back to me. She's talking to somebody on the phone. Now I know who she's talking to. And she heard me. She gently put down the phone. And she started to turn around. And he said 3 words. He said, Susan, I know. And she stared at him. She still hadn't looked at me in the counseling room. And when those words were said, she fell to the bed, started sobbing. He fell to his knees by the bed, started sobbing. And Barbie, I tell you, I had tears going down my cheeks because now I'm sobbing because I realized that right in front of me was the drama of a marriage. And I knew what was going to happen in the next moments would change the course of this marriage, these kids, this legacy, the potential to be grandparents, passing on a baton of a godly marriage and family. All of that was in the firestorm. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, we called you. And I said, and here we are. And he said, and here we are. And then I looked at him, and Barbie, I remember it as if it just happened. I said, you know, you guys, there's hardly a pastor in the country that wouldn't say, you know what, you've committed adultery. Susan, Phil's got the opportunity to leave this marriage. You have violated the covenant. So there's not many guys or gals that are leading that would say, you can't leave. That would make sense. And I said, Phil, what are you going to do? And I'll never forget what he said. And he didn't look at me, he looked at his wife. He said, I'm going to win my wife back. And I said, you're what? He said, I'm going to win my wife back. And with that, Susan raised her eyes and she caught his vision. She caught his brokenheartedness. She caught the fear. She caught the resolve. She caught the rising up. She caught the humility. And here's what she said. She said, you mean you would want me even after I cheated on you? And here's what he said. Susan, here's the deal. I didn't cheat on you, but I cheated you. And when he said that, she looked at him and I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I cheated her by not connecting. I cheated her by distancing. I cheated her by being too preoccupied with work. I cheated her by being preoccupied with sports. I cheated her so many different ways by being a good parent and a lousy spouse. And I looked at them because now they looked at me and they said, will you help us? And I said, I'll help you. But do you know the war you're going to have to fight to restore this marriage? Yeah, I mean, this is a mess. And then she said, well, Gary, here's the other thing. I'm going to see this guy. I haven't seen this guy in a few weeks, but I'm going to see him at a dinner. And I don't know what to do. And I said, you're not going to the dinner. And she goes, why? And I said, because there may be 1,000 people in that ballroom. But if he sees you from 1,000 feet away, I'm not worried about you doing something stupid sexually. I'm worried about your eyes connecting and reinvigorating this distancing that you're trying to have. Now, at the end of this podcast, I'm going to tell you the rest of the story because I saw them again after they restored their marriage. But Barbie, this is a couple that understood cheating. They understood cheating, not because they both committed adultery. The girl did, the gal did. But they understood that cheating is wider than that. Cheating has got different definitions. Cheating's got different levels. But make no mistake about it. When you aren't sold out and loving your spouse the way God designs, you're not pursuing them more and longing for that. You're not putting up the guardrails. Cheating is the end result.
Gary, let's talk about, and I've heard you unpack this before, often when someone goes off-roading with their eyes, with flirtation, it's the little foxes. It's not always you don't wake up in the morning and say, gee, I'm going to blow out my marriage today.
Right.
But it's a matter of those small choices, maybe not guarding our hearts. Can you talk about that?
Well, it's when we don't put up the guardrails. It's when we aren't intentional. You guys, you are living, if you're married, and Barb and I have been married for a long time. If you're married like we're married, and it's first marriage, second marriage, it doesn't matter. You know what? There's a flat out war against you and your marriage because Satan hates your marriage. God loves your marriage. He sent his son to die for us so that we could step into life and have life eternal, but also have healthy families. But the enemy of God wants to destroy our marriages. And so if we go into this with some mamby-pamby approach and just kind of sit back and smoke a cigarette and lay in a hammock and put our feet up all the time, and we put down our guard, we're fools. You got to put up your guard. You got to fight for your marriage. You got to realize that the adversary is fighting for your marriage and casting doubt and insecurity. So Barbie, one of the things I've learned, and I've coached guys all over the place, is that you got to be intentional to put up guardrails. You got to put up guardrails with your hands. So guys, it's not, if I see, a woman that she's married to my pastor or something, and I haven't seen him for a while, or a friend from college, I'll give him a pat on the back or, kind of a weird, gentle, awkward hug, but I'm not laying my hands all over some other guy's wife. That's that guy's wife. Let him put his hands on his wife. And by the way, guys, keep your hands off my wife is what I like to say. But your hands are an important part. But Barb, it's not just your hands, it's more.
It is. It's what you say.
Yeah, so it's your tongue.
It's very much your tongue. Now, we'll unpack more, some materials that we've written on this. But when I have stood up to men's group and unpacked this issue and explained to them the importance of realizing that a woman doesn't think like you. A woman doesn't act like you. A woman knows how to flirt, how to utilize her femininity and draw you in. And if you're weak-willed, you will fall for the bait. Many men will say to me after I've spoken, you're talking exactly what my wife has told me all these years. And I've told my wife, I'm a well-intentioned guy. I would never try to blow out my marriage. But the reality is it's subtle. And sometimes it's not subtle. But you have to realize that a woman thinks differently. We women are incredible. We are a God design, but not every single woman is thinking about guarding her marriage. It could be, Gary, that in this situation or any situation, if a gal doesn't have a love-filled marriage, if she's in a loveless marriage, her heart may be open to someone drawing her outside of the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
She may be looking for Jesus in a lot of different places. I mean, she might see a very godly man, even in church or leading the choir.
Especially in church.
Especially because that's where Jesus Christ is preached. And don't we all want the more of Jesus? Unfortunately, a woman, and you can speak to if a man does or not, but a woman can get kind of cross-wired thinking, he's so great. He's so perfect. Wouldn't he be wonderful with me? Well, no, especially if he's married. Especially if he's married to a wonderful woman that he treasures and loves, and he's wanting to guard and boundary around the marriage.
So our eyes, and guys, we're visual. So we have to guard our eyes. We have to purpose, because if the flesh kind of rears up there, we will drift away and looking at another woman. So when I'm interacting with a woman that's not my wife, I envision my 2 adult daughters, Sarah and Missy, and Barbie, my bride of all these years, and I envision my mom. Because my mom was a straight shooting Norwegian, and she's in heaven now, but I think she's still watching from heaven. And I envision my mom, my wife, and my 2 daughters standing there with me. And if they can give me the thumbs up the way I'm looking at another woman, then I'm in good shape. But I won't keep eye contact with another woman. I'll turn away. Barb, you've seen me turn away.
I have seen you turn away. And this one day I was talking to a friend of yours, and he had been in a men's group that you were teaching this about. And this guy is the greatest guy in the world. But when he was talking to me, he's going, his eyes were just bouncing off the walls. And I thought, what's the matter with that guy? He knows how to have communication and good eye contact. And then I had realized Gary had talked about don't maintain eye contact with a woman that is not your wife. So this gentleman who loves the Lord was doing exactly what he had learned that day. Gary, you have to guard the eyes, but you have to guard, and every one of us, guard our ears.
Yeah.
When a great godly man is telling a story, and if there is a woman that is acting like she is your only audience, if she is laughing too loud, if she's throwing her head back and leaning into the conversation, I'm going to say one thing, and that is run.
Yeah.
Run. And if you don't run,
just like Joseph did with Potiphar's wife.
If you don't run, your wife will be after you, and she will be talking to you that night. Because you know what? We as women see it when a woman is hungry for another man.
Yeah.
And she's flirtatious, and she's sort of, I was going to say one thing, but I'm not saying it because you know what? I'm going to let you carry on the rest.
Well, so we got to watch our hands and touch. We got to watch our eyes and what we're looking at. We got to watch our ears. I get a guy in Memphis, I said that too. He's still kind of cross-eared. But you got to listen to your ears so that you're not connecting or hearing something. When a woman says, I'm thinking these things, you're probably in okay shape. When she said, I'm feeling these emotions, here's what I do. I take out a piece of paper, I write down a phone number and hand it to her. It's Barb's phone number. And if she says, well, you're Dr. Gary, I want to talk to you. I said, well, I don't want to talk to you. Go ahead and call my wife if you want to unpack your feelings. I don't want another woman's feelings. I mean, one woman's feelings are enough for me.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
You've got 2 daughters as well.
And a neuter dog.
And
so, feelings are everywhere around my place.
We will come after you.
So you got to watch your hands, your eyes, your ears, your tongue. What are you saying to another woman? And I coach guys, guys, don't be opening up your life. And we're going to have entire podcasts in this series to help you get a better understanding of the guardrails around that. But you don't want to open up your life to another woman. You want to save it for your wife. We'll do a whole podcast on save it for your wife.
We were talking to a couple recently, and she was really impassioned about this whole flirting and how a woman had in front of her at a party just carried on with this gal's husband. And she went on and she really unpacked some issues. At one point she stopped. We turned to her husband and we said, do you understand? She's not criticizing you. She's fighting for your marriage. And to understand the woman that you're married to, you might feel like, gee, I'm in trouble again. Gee, I didn't do anything this time. It was, this other gal or this woman friend of hers or my sister-in-law, who knows? The reality is this: go to your wife, tell her, I love you. I am a one-woman man. If you are, because Gary is a one-woman man.
Yeah, baby.
So when you hear that, that begins to settle the dust, settle the issues. But the reality is this: you've got to build a higher fence, a higher boundary, a higher wall around your marriage. And by the way, make your best friends male friends. Gals, make your best friends, I would say, your husband, or find women that are good friends to you. And by the way, for you and for me and those that want the more in the marriage, be each other's best friend.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you may have a friend today that is cheering you on outside of your marriage, a gal for me, and by tomorrow, she's gone. So the reality is, make your spouse your best friend and listen to your spouse. Listen to who he says, man, I really like that gal in your life. She brings out the best in you. She's for our marriage. She builds you up. You're even a better wife when you come home to me. And gals, say the same thing to your husband. If there's a man in his life that is a great listener, a godly man, a great coach and friend, but really loves you, and that is for your marriage.
So are you cheating in your marriage? Clearly there's the adultery cheating, and that's a very clear, it's right in front of us. It's a hard one. Can you come back from that brink of utter ruin, as Proverbs 5 says? Yes, you can. And we're going to coach you throughout these podcasts, these series. We're going to coach you on how to come back from the brink if you're at the brink. But suffice it to say that you don't want to cheat in adultery, but you also don't want to cheat with your five senses of your touch or your eyes, your tongue, or your hearing, your listening, all those things. You want to be very intentional to put up the guardrails to keep your marriage intact. And here's another place I think that people cheat, is that they are better parents than they are lovers. And, we love our kids. We've got 2 kids. We got 12 grandkids. We'll tell you those stories later. But we're sold out to parenting and grandparenting. But you know what? They leave. They leave. And I know that now Barb and I are living in what my friend Stu Weber calls the dividend years. We've invested. And now we're living with a lot of passion, with a lot of fun, getting to do some of the things we always wanted to do. We've been doing ministry for over 40 years. And so we're taking advantage of the dividend, and we're living with the richness of healthy relationships with our kids and our grandkids. We double date with 3 of our grandkids and their boyfriends and girlfriends. It's a blast to do that. Our adult kids said they never want to go out with us, but they do with Papa and Gaga. So that's kind of a fun thing to do as well. But put your marriage over your parenting. And then, Barb, what about careers?
Oh, it's so
Talk
easy.
about that.
When we're working, we owe our employer our very best.
Yeah.
We owe our employer because we're being paid and we have responsibilities and we want to make sure we are excellent employees. Sadly, though, not every employer understands the importance of keeping family first. And so there can be a war waging of being pulled between your family and being pulled between your work. And oftentimes, if you're being paid by your employer, you're going to go that direction. And I'm talking to men and women. What's it going to take for you to step back if you're keeping your work number one and bringing your family value, your marriage value number one, and making sure that your career supports it and your career supports your family being number one / number two.
Yeah. So we don't want to cheat. What we want to do is we want to invest in the one that we shared wedding cake with. We want a healthy marriage. We want a healthy boundary around that marriage. And through this series of podcasts, Barbie and I are going to help you learn more and more how to do that. We're going to put you on our shoulders. We get to coach marriages And we've been doing this for the last 10 years. So I used to do counseling. We've written a bunch of books and traveled all over the place and served a lot of different marriages. But we're doing a very small niche area of marriage coaching now with just a small group of people. But people have challenged us and said, those dozen couples a year, they get to come fly in where you live and spend days with you and have these intensives and have all this. They are really getting the best fruits of all these years of your coaching. What about the rest of us? And that's why some people said, why don't you set up these podcasts and start doing this so that we can watch them and listen to them, or watch clips, listen to them. We can give them to our adult kids, our grandkids, our friends, people in trouble, people just wanting a good marriage, pre-marriage. And so we're really, all those different variables and different types of couples are in our crosshairs. We want to help and coach you. And so let me encourage you, first of all, call in with your questions, and our announcer will tell you how to do that. But I want to finish this story, Barb, because we write about it in the book, The 5 Love Needs of Men and Women. And this is the runner-up for Book of the Year. We got beat out by some upstart female author, Kay Arthur.
Kay Arthur.
Yeah.
Go
and so
Kay.
You may know Kay. We love
wonderful.
Kay Arthur.
Yeah.
But she beat us out that year for Book of the Year. But this is number 2. But let me tell you the rest of the story with Phil and Susan. They went through months of counseling, and then they moved to another city. And so I didn't get to see them. And years later, I was speaking in that city, and they heard I was coming, and they wrote my office and said, hey, I know this is weird, but would Gary come see us at our house? In fact, you could even stay over the night after he speaks, and we'll take him to the airport the next day. And I thought, well, I'll save the ministry a little bit of money. I'll go stay at their place. Well, I got into a cab. This is before Uber. I got into a cab at the end of that evening. And the last thing I wanted to do was to go to somebody's house. I wanted to go, watch ESPN or, a Bill Murray movie or something. So, but I went there, and I came and I rang the doorbell, and the door opens, and I look down, and there's a little girl, and she's in a little dress, and she said, are you Dr. Gary? I said, well, yes, honey, I'm Dr. Gary. And I looked at her, and then I looked up, and I saw the mom and the dad, and then I saw all these other kids, and they all had on nice shirts and little dresses, and they were standing on the staircase. And that little girl looked at me, and she said, you get to stay in my room tonight. And I said, I do. And the first thought I had was, I hope they take off the rubber sheet. But I said, I do. And she said, yes. And then I looked at the mom and dad, and I kind of did the calculation. And she was the little girl whose diaper was being changed the day that dad came to a crossroads on whether or not he would fight for his marriage or he would go the way of his flesh, of the enemy's taunting, of the culture, of what most churches would say, walk away. But this guy didn't, because he had the courage, he had the humility, he had the obedience, and he fought to restore his marriage. He confessed his own cheating, not adultery, but he wasn't there. He didn't connect. He didn't spend time. He put work ahead of his wife. And Barb, I looked into the face of that couple, and they put the kids down. We prayed over these little squirts, and we had church that night. And it's and I got chills right now, and this is years ago, but it was one of the most refreshing evenings because it was a story of redemption. And that marriage is at a crossroads at that juncture. And you know what? Your marriage may be there too. Your kids' marriages, your parents, your friends. We see it all day, every day for the last almost 50 years of helping people. And yet what God wants to do is he not only wants to bring you back from the brink of that, but he wants to strengthen you by putting guardrails and boundaries and helping you learn to do that and having you hang out with people that care deeply about their life stories. But what we know is life stories are lived out a day at a time. And so we are privileged and honored that we get to be your marriage coaches, because we're going to love on you. We're going to coach you. We're going to encourage you. We're going to speak into you. We're going to encourage you even when you are drifting into places you don't want to go, and remind you that God's not done with you. So call 1-855-Rosberg if you got questions. Our announcer will tell you all about it. We can't wait for you to join us for the next episode of the Rosbergs, Your Marriage Coaches. Guard your hearts. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Rosbergs, Your Marriage Coaches, with Dr. Gary and Barbie Rosberg. To find out more, go to americasfamilycoaches.com. Once you're there, you can check out the many resources that they have available. From their many books to their informative video series, 6 Secrets to a Lasting Love, they've got all the tools you need to help you grow deeper in your relationship with your spouse and with God. Go to americasfamilycoaches.com and click on the Resources tab. Also, if you have a marriage question, you can call 855-ROSBERG and leave a message with your question. We may use your question on a future episode. We appreciate your prayers and support for this ministry. Find out how you can come alongside us when you go to americasfamilycoaches.com. Just search the top of the index for the Donate tab. Thank you for listening in today. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of The Rosbergs, Your Marriage Coaches, with Gary and Barbie Rosberg.